only trick out is you. Even when you're with my boo, you know I'm crazy over you.
Hello everyone, and welcome. Yes, I have disappeared for quite some time, but I am finally back. So, for today's video, we are more or less just going to be talking about every single melee weapon that Downlight 2 has to offer and rank them. I'm also going to be talking about their goods and downsides for a moment, and just overall just talk about them in general. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into it, starting off with the one-handed weapons. Specifically, the knives. The knives, despite dealing the lowest amount of damage compared to the other weapons, and having the shortest range and less durability, makes it up for it for having a very fast attack speed. And plus, it's also one of those weapons where it is able to hit multiple targets without really bouncing off that often, unless it's an enemy that is armored or blocking your attack. And that's it. For human enemies, it can be quite effective, but because of its very fast attack speed, there will be certain points where you can accidentally hit them while they're blocking your attacks, but as long as you have a elemental effect ready to be deployed, or you have that specific mod where it passively charges up and shoots out, you are able to really dish out huge amounts of damage in a quick session. Again, the big problem with the knife is that you don't really have a lot of modification slots compared to the other weapons where it can be quite effective. And against like volatiles or like the larger enemies, it can be a little bit challenging at certain times because you don't really have a lot of modifications in your own hands, but as long as you're able to dodge attacks and as well as be able to maneuver around the enemies and you're constantly attacking them without getting any hit, the knife is a very good weapon in terms of dealing huge amounts of damage. It goes into B tier, or it's a 7.5 out of 10. It's a definitely really good weapon in terms of dishing out damage. But again, you have to get really close to the enemies, which can lead you in a bit of a vulnerable position to get attacked from a lot of angles in one way or another. But I'd say the best way to use this weapon is against like goons and demolishers paired well with the muscle booster. I am going to be mentioning the muscle and the rage booster a lot, so be aware of that one. The one-handed sticks, maces, and as well as hammers are more or less focused on against human enemies. Well, sure, they do lower damage compared to the other one-handed weapons, but they make it up for it for being a blunt weapon. Blunt weapons have a very common tendency of staggering enemies, or as well as leaving them stunned for a much longer period. Against human enemies, this is quite effective as it allows you to be able to either execute them or use them as a sort of combo, whether it be through vault kick, performing a fire jump, or jumping over them to use in a ground pound, whatever. Again, in terms of using it against like the infective, it's not really that. You can use it, but it's not really that good because of its really low damage compared to the others. Again, blunt weapons are more or less better against human enemies, mainly because of its staggering capabilities, and that's it, at the cost of losing some bit of firepower. It is able to hit multiple targets with a singular swing, it does have slightly longer range compared to the knife, and the stamina consumption is not really that bad, the same with knives, and yada yada yada. I will mention the stamina consumption if it's really bad or if it's like really good. So yeah, that's it. Honestly, it's another B tier weapon or a 7.5 out of 10. It's a really good weapon. It gets the job done when it's needed, and it's really damn good against the human enemies. In terms of the larger boys, it's fine, but it's not really that great. One-handed axes deal the highest amount of base damage compared to a lot of the other one-handed weapons, but the downside being is that it does swing a little bit slower and has the ability to bounce off of enemies a lot more frequent compared to the others. This is more of like a riskier weapon because of its slower swing speed, so if you're someone that likes to consistently dish out damage and have a very consistent speed, then this weapon is not really for you. But if you're able to dodge attacks consistently and land hits very often, then this is the perfect weapon for you. Because it's a slicing weapon and the base damage is higher, that basically means that you have a higher chance of being able to take it, decapitate, or cut off a enemy's body part. And if you use this with like the larger enemies, and if you're able to dodge their attacks, then you have a weapon that is able to really delete the big boys, especially the volatiles, goons, and demolishers, in a very quick session. It is a very powerful weapon, but it's a bit more risky because of its bouncing effect that it has, as well as its slower swinging speed. The stamina consumption is not really that bad compared to the others, but it is a little bit noticeable here and there because of its higher damage. In terms of ranking, I'd say this is the best in the game if you know what you're doing. I'd say it gets around a 9 out of 10 or A tier. As for the machete, it's sort of in the middle ground between the hammers and as one-handed hammers and as well as the one-handed axes. It can either deal more damage than the axes or less damage. It has a much more faster swinging speed compared to the others, except for the knife. And that's pretty much it, honestly. It's just basically the axe, but has a faster swinging speed as well as being able to hit multiple targets without bouncing off very often, and that's it, unless it's an enemy blocking your attack or an armored opponent. It's very good. Basically, it's just the axe, but either less or more firepower, as well as just being able to hit multiple targets with a single swing. Again, it's a 9 out of 10 or an A tier. It's a really good weapon that will get the job done when needed. It's one of those weapons where if you don't like the slower attack speed of an axe, but don't mind the losing the damage that it extra has, then the machete is a really good alternative. Now we're going over with the knuckle dusters as well as the long weapons and two-handed weapons. The knuckle dusters are basically knives but have a much more faster attack speed. The only difference between the knife as well as the knuckle dusters is the fact that the knife has a more horizontal swing spread, meanwhile the knuckle dusters more or less focuses on hitting a specific target or multiple targets with a singular attack, but more in a straight line basically. The knuckle dusters have a much more faster attack speed for both light and heavy attacks, so you are sort of able to hit the renegades a lot more often and frequent, and as well as on the bigger boys, and I'd say they're also a little bit better mainly due to the fact that it pairs well with the tank class, and tank class being the best in the game makes it a lot more better because of its extra resistance that it's able to provide, and that's it. I'd say it's a definite low A tier or like A minus, and it gets a 8 out of 10. I'd say it is definitely better in terms of like 1v1 encounters, especially against like volatiles, goons, and demolishers. I'd say it is definitely better than the knife, but I'd say the knife is more or less focused on crowded enemies that are like more weaker, like virals or archers or flamethrower renegades and etc. They're both pretty good, but I'd say in my opinion the knuckle dusters are a lot more better, but they are definitely rare to find and a lot more harder, and knives are a lot more easier to find. So I guess your opinion on that one can sort of change in one way or another. Long sticks or long maces are pretty much the same way as long one-headed maces or sticks or hammers. They're pretty much the exact same thing. Less damage, it's a blunt weapon, it staggers human enemies or in fact a lot more frequent, and that's pretty much it. The only good side or the big difference I can see is that it has a slower swinging speed, and as well as being a long weapon, it has a much more longer range, which kind of has a bit of an advantage because you can actually sort of position yourself in a certain way where you can hit the enemies more safely without being hit or being in a much more riskier position. And it also gives you a lot more room to dodge around attacks, so which is pretty good. Again, because of its lower damage, it can sort of mess you up a lot, especially against the bigger boys because of its slower swinging speed, so it does get a 7.5 or a B tier. It's a good weapon, but it's not really that great. The axes deal the highest amount of damage in the game, or can deal. It can either do the highest amount of damage in the game or the second highest damage in the game. It does swing slower, so that's the only problem I can really say, and they do bounce off of enemies a lot more often. It gets a low A tier because of its higher damage if you pair it well with the muscle booster or a rage booster, which can really significantly help you out a lot, especially against like the larger infected, which is really damn necessary, and then maybe even like the two-handed renegades or even certain like spear renegades and so on. Its high damage cannot be a noticeable thing, but if you pair it well with the muscle booster, you will definitely feel it a lot, especially against like the normal enemies that you're fighting off, like biters, virals, one-handed renegades, and so on. I'd say it goes into low A tier, maybe like an 8 out of 10. Its high damage can or cannot be noticeable, but its slow swing speed can also kind of mess you up, but again, it has a lot of modification in its own hands, so it can be quite effective. There are two variants of longswords. There are the basic swords like medieval swords and etc., and then there are the katanas. Longswords, in my opinion, are one of the worst in the game because of how much stamina they consume. Sure, they do more damage than the katanas and as well as have a much more faster swinging speed, but they have a lot of downsides. Number one is its abhorrent stamina consumption as well as their ability of bouncing off of enemies. Now, this may not seem that much of a big deal, but the fact that this weapon it takes more stamina than a lot of the two-handed weapons, it's really pathetic. If you're able to at least like perform executions on like the weaker enemies to gain that infinite stamina for a brief period, sure, you can go for it. Or if you can have like something to give you extra stamina or lower the stamina costs from like armor sets or from charms in general, then yeah, go for it. But if you don't have any of those available, or you're fighting off the bigger enemies where they have no other like weaker enemies to perform executions on, then you're going to be spending more time recovering stamina than actually wasting it, because the stamina cost in this thing is absolutely terrible. And it's probably the first weapon to go into C tier because of how terrible the stamina consumption is for me, especially at max level, because a weapon like this should not take a lot of stamina, but here we are. Again, I could be wrong about this, but there really isn't a lot of like the basic medieval swords in the game. There's only like the barbarian, and that's it. That's all I know that exists so far. Well, sure, you could have like stamina regeneration and quick attacks, but that's not going to be enough. You have to kind of fight off against like carded enemies. But in terms of damage output, I'd say it is better than the long sticks and maybe the long axe. But because of its really shit stamina consumption, it's not going to really help you out a lot. Again, if you're able to really deal with it, it can be very good. But if you're someone like me that just spends more time recovering stamina than ever, then it's going to be really problematic. It goes into C tier. The katana, I'd say, is one of the best in the game, mainly because of the fact that it has a really wide swing spread, as well as being able to hit multiple targets with a singular swing, and it's a really good weapon. The damage is higher than a lot of the other melee weapons, as well as it maybe has. Here's the thing: the katana can either deal the most damage in the game in terms of like long weapon wise, or deals less damage than long axes. But that's not really a bad thing. Because of its really wide swinging pattern, as well as being able to hit multiple targets with a single swing, this thing is phenomenal. Use it in a crowded environment, you got yourself a very solid weapon that is able to shred enemies like butter. Sure, it does swing a little bit slower compared to like long axes or the other variant of the long swords. It is still very powerful, as hitting multiple targets is a very valuable thing, especially when it comes to activating a specific mod where it charges up for hitting enemies. And because you're hitting more enemies, you're charging it up significantly quicker, which means you can spam the ability much more quicker, or the elemental effective choice that you have equipped, which is very valuable. Like, this weapon, katanas are a phenomenal weapon. I'd say it goes into S tier because of how versatile they are. It's good against renegades, it's good against the infected, it's good against the big boys. They're a very powerful weapon, and they don't really have a lot of downside in their own hands apart from swinging slower. Their stamina consumption is fine, and that's it. The same goes with like the axes and the sticks, where the stamina consumptions are hardly noticeable, honestly. They're not really that big of a deal, but it still kind of exists, if that makes sense. It goes into S tier, or a 9 out of 10, or 9.5 out of 10. The only reason it's not a 10 out of 10 because it's not a two-handed weapon, which I will get into right now. Two-handed weapons are by far one of the best weapon categories in the game because of their sheer damage output, as well as their really wide swinging pattern, meaning that it is able to hit a lot of targets in a single swing. And they also have a unique attribute where they're able to pierce through a renegade's blocking attack. Sure, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it does good amount of damage to the point where it also staggers them back entirely, or even leaves them stunned for a brief period. Even if you accidentally hit an enemy that is blocking your attack, a lot of the times they're going to get staggered for a brief moment. And if you have like a blast mod with an impact, or something with an impact mod, you're going to be dishing out huge amounts of damage. The two-handed sledgehammers or maces are probably the weakest, mainly because of its lower damage output that it has, as well as only having 2 modification slots. And it has a abhorrent stamina consumption. Not the same way as like the basic long swords, but it does have a really huge noticeable stamina consumption. It goes into high A, or like an 8.5 out of 10, but because of its lower damage as well as its lower durability and having not a lot of modifications, it does kind of mess it up for it. Yes, as a blunt weapon, it is able to stagger enemies a lot more frequent, and as well as allowing you to perform executions more frequently, but the other two-handed weapons are able to do that, but at the cost of, instantly killing them a lot more frequent compared to the sledgehammer. It can be a good weapon, but you have to be very careful of its stamina consumption. That's all I can really say. It can be a good weapon, but it's not really better than the other two-handed weapons. Now, when it comes to two-handed swords, they deal the highest amount of damage in the game, and that's it. Their stamina consumption is sort of in the middle ground between the sledgehammer and as well as the axes, where they take less than the sledgehammers, but more than the axes. They just basically have the highest amount of damage in the game, and that's it, honestly. I can't really say anything special about them. You can actually reach around like 1,030 or 1,050 damage with these guys, which is pretty neat. And if you have like passive stats that are able to deal extra damage towards enemies or at a specific time frame, like like day or night, and paired with a rage or muscle booster, you're literally executing enemies left, right, and center without a fucking effort in the world. This is the ultimate weapon in the game. The same thing can be said about the axes, but they can sometimes either do more damage or less damage than two-handed axes, or swords, pardon me. And they take the least amount of stamina compared to the others, which is very phenomenal. Again, they have a really good range and a really good swing pattern, which makes it very powerful against crowded targets, which makes it way too overpowered than they should be. One big downside about two-handed weapons is that they have a passive debuff that a lot of people don't know. Any staggering effect that Aiden gets lasts a much more longer, and this only applies to whenever you have a two-handed weapon equipped and already holstered out from your inventory, basically. As long as you're holding it out and you have a staggering effect applied to you, it's going to last a lot more longer because of how heavy the weapons are. This doesn't apply to any other weapons, maybe with the polearms, probably, but I'm not sure. But this doesn't apply to other weapons because they're a lot more lighter, which makes sense, but then there's the two-handed weapons with their staggering effect are a lot more longer because of them being a really hefty weapon. I'd say the axes in this game are a definite 10 out of 10 because of either dealing more damage and as well as having less stamina consumption compared to the others, and it's the best in the game because you can actually have 1070 damage on this thing. Well, let's say the two-handed swords do get a 9.5 out of 10, but the reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because of its extra stamina consumption compared to the axes. But its high damage can be a bit noticeable. Paired with Rage or Muscle Booster, then every bit of enemy is going to get killed in like 3 especially like the larger enemies and volatiles are probably going to get killed in like 3 or 4 hits, which is bullshit. And then the renegades are probably going to get like 1 or 2 tapped instantly without any care in the world. So two-handed weapons are the best in the game. So yeah, polearms are a strange weapon. They have longer range, they have a much wider swinging pattern, and they stagger enemies a lot more frequent compared to any other melee weapon in the game. But the big downside is its abhorrent stamina consumption. My god almighty, the stamina consumption on this thing is absolutely terrible. A few swings and you're already winded. If you're able to perform executions, which you can very often, you're good to go. The first heavy attack you hit on a viral or on a renegade, you can actually perform executions instantly, which is something a lot of the melee weapons are unable to do whatsoever. And if you're able to have like some sort of extra stamina or extra stamina reduction on consumptions, then you need it. You really need it. It deals really good amount of damage, not the same way as like the other two-handed weapons, but it does a shit ton of damage. It is able to perform really huge amount of damage, and because of its really wide swing pattern and as well as its really hefty range, you can really keep yourself in a much safer distance compared to the any other weapons in the game and still dish out huge damage, especially against the larger infected, where you can literally just take a few steps back whenever they're about to perform attack and be safe. And you can still attack them relatively safe distance when they're swinging their weapons around. Again, I'd say polearms are a high risk, high reward weapon. If you're able to handle its really absurd stamina consumption, then this weapon is phenomenal. It goes into S tier, but the ranking wise, I'd say it's a 9.5 out of 10 because of its shit stamina consumption. And that's it. It is a very powerful weapon that a lot of people should be using. It is amazing, but it's a very risky weapon because of its really terrible stamina consumption. And there you have it. Just because I said that the sword is C tier or like a lot of the weapons are on B tier, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad in the game whatsoever. Every single melee weapon in Dying Light 2 are very good and powerful in their own ways, but it's more or less my personal opinion in terms of like how effective they are on everything. Sure, because they're better at a specific weapon, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're very situational. That's not true. They're very good against everything, but it's more or less my personal opinion. You can literally use a basic sword or only knives throughout the entirety of the game and still do very good at dishing out damage and complete the story without any problems whatsoever. Every single weapon in the game works, but I'm more or less saying that which weapon is actually better than the others. You can use whatever your heart desires, you can use whatever you want, and still be good with it. It's not like it's the same way in Dying Light 1 where two-handed weapons are dog shit. The same thing goes with like knives, and then long weapons just kind of get overshadowed by one-handed weapons entirely. It's not the same way in the second game, where every single one of them have a different function and have a different feeling to it. Every single melee weapon is different in their own ways. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this video gave you a very good insight on each of the melee weapons in the game, and I will see each and one of you next time. Take care of each other, treat each other with respect, show some love, kindness to another, and I will see each and every one of you next time. Goodbye, and have a very good day, or night.